Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 194th New Social Environment. I'm Nick Bennett, the Special Projects Editor at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between two feminist icons, Judy Chicago and Dr. Maura Reilly. We're also thrilled to have the poet Aaron Shurin here, who will read to close today's program. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country, and acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability, and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce today's guest and host, please join me for a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's guest and host. I have to say, as a feminist, it is a true honor to welcome Judy Chicago to today's program. Judy is a renowned artist, author, feminist, and educator whose career spans almost 6 decades. Since 1996, she has lived in Belen, New Mexico, where her nonprofit arts organization, Through the Flower, is headquartered, and where an art space and resource center has been established. Judy was named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine in 2018, and I will post in the chat Judy's full biography, which includes recent and upcoming exhibitions, including some very exciting news about her upcoming autobiography. Her current exhibition, Judy Chicago, What If Women Ruled the World, is on view at Jeffrey Deitch, New York through December 19th. Today's host, Dr. Maura Reilly, is the founding curator of the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, where she developed and launched the first exhibition and public programming space in the USA devoted entirely to feminist art. While there, she organized several landmark exhibitions, including the permanent installation of Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. Her book, Women Artists, The Linda Nochlin Reader, now in paperback, was just listed as one of the best books of 2020 by the New York Times. Excuse me. Maura is an editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Rail, and stay tuned to the Rail's events page for her upcoming conversation on curatorial activism part 2 this coming January. We'll post some more info on that as well. So without further ado, Maura, take it away.
Yay. Judy, you have to take your mute button off. Let's do that.
Just a second, everyone.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Hi, Maura, and congratulations
Hi.
on the Times.
Hello, thank you, Judy. It's a thrill. Linda Nochlin would be so happy.
Oh,
I start.
oh my God. Look how young you look.
Look at you. What
Yeah, I look younger too.
Yeah. So I am so happy to be here today. Judy and Donald are two of my favorite people in the world. Absolutely thrilled to be here to meet with my old dear friend, Judy Chicago, the legendary Judy Chicago. So it's fun to be here virtually. Judy, I wish I was there to give you a hug. This is all a little bit strange. But thank you, Fong and Nick, for inviting us. It's really, really, an exciting opportunity. Now, just tell the audience a little bit about how Judy and I met. We met in 2002. We just determined the other day, almost 20 years ago. in my association with the Sackler Center at the museum. And I was also remembering, Judy, just this morning that we also knew each other well from putting together the Feminist Art Project, right? You remember we worked on that?
Right. Yes, I remembered that from your notes, Maura.
Yeah. Yeah, we started that with Arlene Raven and Susan Fisher Sterling. It's now housed at Rutgers. But principally our involvement was, around the dinner party and its permanent installation. Hopefully some of you have seen it. We worked closely with Susan Rodriguez at Polshak and tried to figure out how to, install this enormous triangle into a square peg. And so that was quite a feat. But hopefully many of you have had the opportunity to see this incredible, sort of iconic work of art. And Judy, I was hoping that you could give a very quick, just sort of just explanation of how the dinner party sort of arrived at the Brooklyn Museum via like the Getty Institute.
The Getty? What did it have to do with the Getty?
Well, remember it was conserved there?
Oh, no. The Getty gave Through the Flower a conservation grant to do a study of the dinner party. It was actually done here in Belen. And as I often say, I learned more about conservation than I ever wanted to know. Anyhow, I don't actually know the official story. I only know the anecdotal story, which was that from the beginning, my intention was for the dinner party to be permanently housed, because otherwise I was afraid that it would simply recount the story. It would recapitulate the story it recounts, which is of repeated erasure of women's achievements. And of course, I was a young artist when I did the dinner party. I started it, I was not even 40 when it opened after having worked on it for 6 years. And I had no idea how permanent housing happened. So over the course of 30 years, there were repeated efforts by community groups to house the dinner party, to raise money through the Flowers Board, which was always small, wanted desperately to see the dinner party housed. And none of those efforts worked out. Along the way, in terms of one effort in Washington, D.C., the dinner party ended up being, quote, debated in the House of Representatives, and it was discussed entirely by men. There was not one woman who spoke about it, and none of the men had seen it. So basically, when Donald and I were sitting there, quite by chance, we found out about the congressional debate. And when we were sitting there watching it, I was like, does Congress always know so little about what it's talking about? And I guess, as we've seen lately, apparently, not only do they know very little about what they talk about half the time, but they don't care what the American people want. Anyway, as I understand it, finally, Elizabeth Sackler, who had gone on the board of the Brooklyn Museum, walked into the then director's office, Arnold Lehman, after having had dinner with us, I think about a year before, and asking me what would I think if she housed the dinner party. And I'm like, what do you mean? What would I think? I would be ecstatic. And she said, well, where do you want it? And I said, New York, because of course, New York hated me. So I thought it would be perfect for the dinner party to be in New York's face.
I never knew that.
I know you didn't. Anyway, because I knew they'd have to watch streams of people going to see it, which of course is what's happening. Anyway, so apparently, from what I understand, Elizabeth walked into Arnold's office carrying the dinner party book. And she said, Arnold, how would you like to have this? And he said, oh, Elizabeth, that'd be great, because somebody stole my copy of the book. And she said, not the book, Arnold, the piece.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. I love that. And I love, Judy, how you brought up that by giving it a permanent place, it actually really, dealt with the long-term issue that you've been looking at throughout the entirety of your career, which is countering erasure of women artists. So I love that too. And, people can read about the dinner party, at length online. And one of the reasons I want to move on quickly from it is because Judy, unfortunately, has been, Judy Chicago has been synonymous with the dinner party for decades. And she has been producing the most extraordinary work outside of that installation, both before and after. So today we're going to look at a lot of her recent work. And of course, it's going to harken back a little bit to the dinner party, because as I think Judy and I will explain, there's still a kind of common thread of sort of, goddesses and women's work and the, reclamation of women. These are constant themes in Judy's work. So we started with the dinner party, but we want to move on by talking about one of the
before we move on, I just want to say one thing, which is that the story of erasure, repeated erasure, the dinner party recounts, is not just the erasure of women's history. It's the erasure of multiple histories, the history of African Americans, the history of Native Americans, the history of gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender peoples. It is a strategy of the dominant patriarchal culture to erase the histories that don't fit into the prevailing paradigm and narrative. And I think that's very important because, like last night, we were watching the 4th episode of Steve McQueen's Small Axes, which is just incredible. And it's about a writer who has been largely erased from the mainstream. I mean, it's again another story of the ways in which and in fact, he learns about his history in jail when his jail cellmate says, "Read, man, read. You cannot have a future if you don't know your past." It was incredible. Anyway, go on.
No, perfect. I mean, that's a perfect lead in to what we'll be talking about, which is, I want us to look quickly at the importance of the goddess throughout your career. And the reason being is that I think the female divine so beautifully, female divine, for those of you that don't know, is one of Judy's recent masterpieces. And we're going to give a lot of bandwidth to that in a second. But I love the idea, Judy, of starting with the importance of the goddess throughout the course of your career, beginning, for those of you that haven't seen them, these two plates here from the dinner party, the primordial goddess and the fertile goddess. And Judy, I pulled some of these out, which are some of your early works from the 1970s. And I'd love to hear from you about that particular period, and then ultimately how it's going to relate for us to the Dior piece through the inflatable goddess.
Well, when I was doing research for the dinner party, I started with early cultures. And one of the things I discovered was that almost all early societies worshipped female deities. And I found that incredibly important because, in my view, as long as divinity is invested in the male, women will never be equal. It is not enough for there to be, for example, female priests in Catholicism, as long as they worship a male god, because a male-centered God concept privileges the male on every level. Men are divine and women are what? Not.
Right.
So it was interesting to me that I discovered this, and also that the butterfly was one of the earliest symbols of the goddess, because of course the butterfly appeared from the beginning of my career, even in my early work in the 1960s, that work that was so hated by my male professors, and then the male dominated art scene in LA. So actually, without understanding it fully at the time, now I understand that what was hated was my assertion of the spiritual nature of the female experience and the divinity, the potential divinity and agency of women.
Yeah. Yeah, and then simultaneously, you are thinking really big about goddesses. Not only these smaller figurines that we just saw, but you had this really ambitious, kind of project from 1977. This one here, the inflatable mother goddess, and you ultimately got to realize this in a different format. But can you tell us about what you were thinking? Like, what were your aspirations with this early piece?
Well, again, it had to do with the divinity, potential divinity of the female, or in my sense, the female experience. You know, I grew up with the idea, with the repeated assertion on every level of society of the masculine as universal. And it's like now we see and can understand something that I understood early in my career, which is that male-centered art is not universal and it's not neutral. It actually, all that abstraction, lack of emotion, like kind of facade of closeness reflects the construct of masculinity. But when I started, there was no language for talking about that. There was no language for talking about the gendered nature of symbols.
Right.
And so I have been fighting against that for a really long time. And my idea of the female goddess figure, which I came up with, first of all, there were goddess temples in early cultures. Mm-hmm. So, I saw that they were destroyed actually by Christianity. But I saw remnants of them and of their figuration, visual figuration. And the thing that's interesting about this 60-foot goddess figure that I came up with in the 70s is that I didn't know Nikita Sanfel's Han when I created this idea. It was, the idea of walking into the female body as a chapel, as a church,
right here,
as an environment, being within it was a reaction to walking into all of those kind of male architectural structures. One of the questions in the Dior banners is, if women ruled the world, would buildings resemble wombs? And one thing which we'll look at, I think, later, one thing that was very interesting to me when I was doing the study for that banner is that actually I looked again at goddess temples, mm-hmm. and I started constructing an image for that banner. And when I finished it, I went around to my staff and I said, look at this. It looks just like my early sculptures.
Oh, it's amazing. And you see what I have up on the screen there, Judy? So I have a literal link between the inflatable mother goddess. And for those of you that don't know, this is the aerial view of the female divine. This is Judy's most recent sort of masterpiece. We're going to look closely at it, but I love this comparison.
Yeah, and I love this too, but this is one of the few times that I had the support to do something bigger than I imagined. Because my idea for the goddess figure was that it would be 60 feet long.
Right. And this is 250.
225 feet long.
Amazing.
And it took 8 engineers to figure out how to build it. And it also was an inflatable, actually.
That was the question
What
I
my
had.
original idea was.
So that was a question I have for you. So this is inflatable.
Yes.
And so let's show a couple other views of it for people. So again, I have a little video too, Judy, of it. But explain just sort of, its placement so people know where it was, because I think it's really funny where it's located.
Yeah, it is funny, actually. But first, for people who don't know, I was invited by Maria Gracia-Cherry, the first female director of Dior, to work with her, to collaborate with her on the Couture show of January this year in Paris. When we made this plan, we were in Paris for the meeting because she brought us over to see the Couture show before. And they told us that normally the Couture shows are held in the Dior building, but it was going under renovation. So they said that it was going to be held in the garden behind the Rodin Museum, which I thought was like perfect.
And Judy, I love how they moved all the Rodin sculptures to the side.
No. I wish.
Okay, I just assumed they had, because I remember walking through that garden and encountering all of them. Okay, so they were, all right. That was my fantasy.
Actually, Maura, that's very funny.
That would be great.
No, what's very funny is I actually asked them a question because when we went to see the Rodin garden, of course, there are all these male figures all over it, right? And I asked it because I didn't realize that there was plenty of space for the installation without doing this, but I asked them if they would consider covering them. And they said, no. Dior said, no, we have a contract because they had done other things. We can't touch the sculptures.
I love that you asked, though.
I did ask.
It's so good.
The thing is, once the goddess figure was installed, we went up into the museum. We did an interview up there. I did an interview. And so there we are, surrounded by all these, you could say that the Rodin Museum is the kind of paean to masculinity. Yeah. So I just loved it that there was all this male-centered art inside the museum. And there was this huge goddess figure right in back of it.
I know, but also
one better if it was permanent.
But one that you walked into, like you walk through the vagina of the goddess to get into the Dior space. So just so people understand that. I mean, so that's phenomenal. And what I love too is when you get inside, just the majestic. So just folks here, this is what it looked like when you walked in. So
this was for the evening when they set up the table for dinner.
Right.
Oh, Donald wants to paint. What do you?
Oh, he's panning up. So, but Donald, I have it on the screen also.
All right. Okay. Anyway, they had a dinner. The thing that I thought was so clever about this was when I first talked to Maria Gracia, she wanted me to do the ready to wear show in September. Okay. And she wanted to tie it to the dinner party. And I'm like, no, I've had it with the dinner party. I was still in this place like, I hope I live long enough to see the body of my work emerge from the shadow of the dinner party. That's why it was so funny. I told you the story about
I love
meeting with these people about a possible smoke sculpture. And the woman who ran the organization didn't know what the dinner party was. And I'm like, yay!
You're like,
but anyway, it's really clever that Olivier Villalobos, head of global communications for Dior, came up with this idea of the dinner party that night after the show. And that because it kind of tied these two projects together in a very kind of subtle and cool way. But also the other thing is, and we should probably, well, I guess I can do it here even though you can't see it. There's a carpet. This relates.
Oh yeah, I've got that. I've got that.
Yeah. Okay, but the carpet.
Right there, you can see a little bit there.
The carpet, which was 220 feet long and was woven specifically for this, is based on my drawing for the top of the runner for the Eleanor of Aquitaine place setting, which is based on a mille fleur pattern, which is typical of the high Renaissance tapestries. But I had originally, after reading about previous collaborations with Dior, I read that Ralph Simone, when he went to work with Dior for his show, which was in a mansion or castle or something, he covered all the walls with fresh flowers.
Oh, wow.
So my original idea was that the catwalk would be made up of fresh flowers. But then Olivier told me that they wanted to keep the show up for a week afterwards so that people could come and visit it. This is the Couture show.
Yeah.
And actually, Maura, in a week, they had 10,000 visitors.
What? In that just few day period? Wow. Okay. Yeah, just extraordinary. I wish I could have zoomed over there. That was in January, right?
Yeah, it was in January. It's like, and so there we were in Paris for this Couture show. And it was just, it was like the greatest creative opportunity of my life. And we came back and then COVID happened. So, that actually is a kind of good metaphor for the kind of roller coaster that my life has been.
You mean the COVID, the interruption of it?
No,
but here,
just this year.
Yeah. Oh, this year alone. Oh, absolutely. And here you can see the more details of the rug. So Judy, tell us about, did you go to the evening, did you go to the Couture show, and how did you feel in that space amidst this exquisite sort of goddess figure?
Well, the first Couture show I'd ever been to was the one that Maria Gracia brought us over for in July of 2019. And that one was in the Dior building. And, she had been collaborating with feminist artists almost since she started working at Dior. Yeah. But still, art was kind of a background, in the Couture show. And I can remember sitting there and wondering if art, first of all, it was overwhelming. Donald and I had never been to a Couture show in our lives.
Right. Who has?
So it was totally overwhelming. The music, the lights, the paparazzi, the glitz. It was just, my God. Anyway, I sat there through the show wondering if art could actually have any real place in a fashion context.
That was the question I had for you. Yeah.
And that's how I approached the project. And what's interesting is I think this was the first time that art, real art, actually objects of art kind of emerged from this context. After all, the banners are now at Jeffrey's Gallery in New York. Then they're going to the National Museum of Women in the Arts. They're going to have, they're having an art life apart from the fashion context that gave birth to them. And that's very different than what has happened before.
With Dior. Yeah.
Well, with any fashion, I think.
Yeah.
So that collaboration.
Yeah. As I look at this space, it's so radically different, this installation shop versus when it's sort of quote unquote in use. And it's like, do you think that the models were aware of the fact that, that they were showcasing haute couture within this incredible sort of feminist installation, or did they have a kind of disconnect? What was your feeling on that? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I'd like to actually start a little before that,
Yeah.
which has to do with where the banners were fabricated. Because of Maria Gracia, Dior supports a school in Mumbai to teach women to embroider. In India, embroidery is done by men. And so this is very radical in terms of challenging the male domination of a technique that we actually associate with women in the West. But also, while they were working on the banners, the Dior people sort of also did empowerment work with the women.
Oh,
They
wow.
talked to them about the questions on the banners.
So literally,
one of the great things about this thing with the school was, if you think about it, my lifelong support and work for female empowerment, these banners connected me and my work in Belen, New Mexico, with Maria Gracia in Paris and her work for the empowerment of women, and stretched all the way to Mumbai. So this was a kind of global outreach that comes from the outreach of Dior. I mean, I think I told you that when they sent us the press book for this, it was 1,000 pages long, which means that my collaboration with Dior allowed me a global platform to raise a series of questions that I think are relevant all over the world, actually.
Yeah, let's talk about these questions. So what if women ruled the world? For those of you who haven't seen them, would God be female? Would men and women be equal? Would both men and women be gentle? Would both men and women be strong? Would there be equal parenting? Would old women be revered? Would buildings resemble wombs, which Judy just mentioned? Would there be private property? Would there be violence? Would the earth be protected? And these are massive, universal, needing to be answered questions. And so tell me about that. Why use these kind of texts? For me, it harkens back to the kind of ceremonial way that you enter the dinner party with those beautiful banners. And here, this kind of ceremonial experience as someone walks through the space and kind of contemplates these philosophical, again, but urgent questions. And I wondered about that, the sort of text, the importance of that in the context of fashion, or was it more in the context of the kind of body of the goddess that you felt that these were the kind of questions that needed to be asked?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that in Paris, there were 2 sets of banners in both English and French. Okay, that's
hugely important.
Yeah, that was important to me because, of course, it was primarily a French audience, although people from all over the world, go to Dior. But before we go to that, let me go back to the question you asked about the models.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know, because I was so busy. I don't know what the models thought about the space, although there were some comments about it. But I'll tell you one thing. When I was watching the rehearsals, the models were talking about how comfortable the clothes were that Maria Gracia designed. This is very important. If you think about the history of fashion and the uncomfortable clothing, and especially the shoes, the obscene shoes that male designers have imposed on women.
Yeah, here they're wearing flats.
They're all wearing, Maria Gracia, her designs, the shoes are always flat and beautiful. And the idea that models who are accustomed to wearing all sorts of couture fashion commented that the clothes were comfortable and how unusual it is in the fashion world for clothes to be comfortable. If you actually think about that these are women, the models, who've had to be subjected for decades to ill-fitting, obscene shoes and uncomfortable clothing, and that's been the norm, then it makes clear how radical Maria Gracia's designs are.
And
so
are they
the question about feminism and fashion, I think, is answered by what Maria Gracia and I did.
So that was my question. So to what extent were her designs in conversation with the installation?
Well, because she's Italian, she grew up with, of course, all of the Greek and Roman statues and goddesses. And so her dresses are definitely related to goddess. And in fact, I looked at goddess clothing very carefully and made a series of sketches about, could these be turned into real clothing? I had no idea. She was ahead of me on that one. So she'd been thinking about that for a really long time. Yeah. I mean, there are some of the dresses are like Amazon armor, or you can see hints of Etruscan clothing or Greek and Roman clothing. I mean,
you see that here.
Yeah, look, I mean, look at this in terms of the Cretan snake goddess, right?
Yep. Oh yeah, on the left is what you're referring to.
Right there, yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's a reference to those layered skirts, that are also on the snake goddess runner in the dinner party. So she drew on images of empowered clothing and empowered women for her designs. And you should have seen the jewelry too. Like she had a snake bracelet, like on the Cretan goddess images, with the, I mean, and also the inside of the body of the goddess and in the couture show was gold.
Oh, I thought it was purple.
No, that's the lights.
I
had wanted lighting inside that was like in the traditional churches, all that beautiful spectral lighting that Matisse kind of took over and clarified in his chapel in the south of France. But they couldn't do that. And so instead what they did was they did changing colors inside. So this is when you saw the blue image.
Yeah.
That was because it was filled with blue light. But when there was no light, the interior of the goddess was gold. And it created this hue. And then most of Maria Gracia's clothes were gold, or they were in the palette that I selected for the banners. And even they relate to the Mille Fleurs pattern.
To the Eleanor of Aquitaine?
What?
To the Eleanor of Aquitaine? They relate?
Yeah, because in Mille Fleurs flowers, there are 4 colors. There's red for the blood of Christ. There's purple for violets, and there's blue for, I may have that back. There's red, blue, and I know there's purple is for the iris, which represents the Virgin Mary. And then I forgot the other one. And there's green for the foliage. Anyway, so I created that palette, which Maria Gracia integrated into her designs in terms of details and also some of the clothing. Amazing. But in order to do this, first of all, the brocade on the front of the banners was woven. also from the mille fleur pattern, but in smaller scale than it appears in the carpet. The applique fabric on the front of the banners, I think they were able to source, but the velvet on the back, which is the same colors, they couldn't find. So they dyed all that, and they dyed all the thread to match.
Wow. Huh. But I didn't realize, yeah.
It's staggering. You know, Dior has these incredible resources. They have artisans all over the world. And I mean, bringing that all together, that, you know, I haven't had, nobody's asked me these kind of questions, Maura, because these are art questions, you know. And so to discuss these in relationship to the work as art is, you know, it's really exciting for me, because the first time I've had a chance to talk about the way I made these and approached this. And then Olivier asked me to design plates for the dinner. And both the spiral and the cowrie are traditional and early symbols of the goddess. And so the plates are done in 4 colors, again, the same 4 colors. And then Dior decided to make them a limited edition available for purchase.
Yeah, and the Avenue Montaigne in Paris, I think. Yeah, they're limited edition. Yeah, amazing.
So again, it's a way of trying to bring meaning into contexts that have been primarily decorative and devoid of meaning or oppressive to women. Same thing goes with the purses.
Yeah, so I have those. I want to talk about those. So this is another, the Lady Dior purses that Judy just mentioned are also from 2020. So again, we're focusing on someone who is producing massive, amazing projects this year. And this is another body of work. I would call it a body of work, wouldn't you, Linda?
I think that's great, because that's, of course, again, could I use something like a purse to teach women's history or talk about female agency?
And I think here, I just want people to know that what I've done here is there are 3 purses here that Judy made for Dior. Below them, no one else would be able to do this connection but me and Judy. These are 3 paintings that I made them very tiny. These are 3 paintings that Judy made from a series called The Great Ladies in 1973. They were 60 by 60 inches, amazing.
No, these are 40, the 2 great ladies, Christina Sweden and Queen Victoria, are 40 by 40.
Okay.
And actually Let It All Hang Out, which is more about female agency and female
one on the left.
sexuality, that's 80 by 80.
Oh, I didn't realize that. And so what you're seeing here is Let It All Hang Out, the painting on the left. We're seeing Christine of Sweden right here. And on the right, Judy, we're seeing
Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria. So Judy used these designs from 1973 for these amazing haute couture purses. And then on the bottom of them, you can't see it well here, but she wrote the name and birth and death dates of the women. So Christine of Sweden there, Queen Victoria, and on the left it says, Let It All Hang Out. Let's talk about that. What was the importance of putting that in the bottom?
Well, the first purse I did was Let It All Hang Out. And actually, the credit for that purse really resides in Donald, because when Olivier, I'll tell you why, when Olivier asked me, well, he told me, I want you to do a purse. If you knew Olivier, you know you can't say no to him, Olivier Villalobos. But anyway, so I got all upset because we were right in the middle of the Dior project. And I was working like 17 hours a day, which, you know, I always used to do, and I still can do, but I don't really want to do because I'm too old to do. But anyway, so I got all upset. I said, Donald, I can't, you know, my way of doing something, my normal way of approaching a project is, okay, first I researched the history of purses. And then I'd understand what the purse had been. I already knew from my research that, like, the purses, the origin, I think, is a little bag that in the Middle Ages, like women would hang under their skirts to carry their money, like female merchants and stuff like that. But I didn't really know how purses had evolved. So I'm like, first I'd research it, then I'd look at all the purses that Dior had ever done, and then I'd look at all the Lady Dior purses, and we were working on this deadline for the banners, and I'm like, it's impossible, I can't do it. And Donald said, you really don't have to do that. I said, I don't? He said, no. You could think about, like, if there were any images you've made that you thought might be able to be adapted to a purse, something I never thought about at all.
Thank you, Donald.
I don't know, huh?
Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Donald. So I thought, let it all hang out might really work. Well, Donald has these fabulous digital skills. So he took that. By then Dior had sent us the pattern for the purses and stuff. And because, you have to work within a certain format. And so he took the image and he digitally manipulated it into 3-dimension. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, I love it. Okay, so we sent it off to Dior. And then Olivier and the purse designer, while we were still in Paris, the purse designer showed me different interpretations of it. Embroidered, printed on leather, studded, beaded. And then he showed us this dichroic image, which what they did was they had the painting printed underneath, I think on leather, and then they had an embossed plastic version of the image with a dichroic coating, like what Larry Bell, my old friend, uses on his glass. So I was very familiar with it. So I thought that was fantastic. So then Olivier and the purse designer came to Belen, which prompted our friend, the author Kevin Kwan, to say, Judy, it's unbelievable the people you get to come to Belen. I mean, Belen is a little town of 7,000 people, in New Mexico. Anyway, so then when they were here, Olivier said, we want to do 2 more. We want to do an evening bag and a large bag.
Oh, I love it.
So we looked at different images from that same period, and they selected Christine of Sweden and Queen Victoria. And I said, the only way I'll go for that is if we put the names and dates of the women on the bottoms. And then, of course, we have to do that for Let It All Hang Out, too. Yeah. So they agreed. And I get asked by everybody who's been interviewing me about the purses, which there have been a lot of questions about them, about my ideal client. And so I say, okay, if Madison Avenue ever comes back, because I understand 30% of the stores are like shuttered, I envision a woman walking down Madison Avenue with the Queen Victoria purse on her shoulder, and somebody stops her and says, gee, that's really cool. What is that purse? And she says, oh, that's based on Judy Chicago's Queen Victoria painting. And then the woman goes, well, why would she choose Queen Victoria? And then she goes home and she Googles Queen Victoria and she finds out what she did for women. And that's, I've taught women's history through a purse.
I know. I love that. So you taught women's history through fashion. It's incredible, but also think about how it links back also throughout the course of your career to the dinner party, right? Which was about promoting social change by creating respect for women's contributions throughout history, right? So,
and to history, not just art history.
Exactly, and to history itself. So I love that. I love that you included the names on the bottom and that these women on Madison Avenue are
having to think about something other than whether they want to buy the purse.
Yeah, and just incidentally, which one was the evening one?
The little one is this one, Christine of Sweden.
Oh, the center one.
You can't see so much of the scale, but this is really big, the Queen Victoria, which I guess she would like. This is the middle-sized purse, and the Christine of Sweden is an evening bag. It's very gold.
Oh. That's the one I want. But so I want to showcase to everybody just how busy you've been in addition to these massive projects. So the last year, 2019, you had a huge show that I saw, fortunately, at the ICA in Miami. And as a correlating event, you did something brilliant, which was a kind of a redo in a way, but I don't want to say
it was not a redo.
I don't want to say a redo. I was correcting myself. So you had done these amazing firework displays in the 60s, 70s, and then you kind of, I don't want to use the word redid. What are you going to tell me here?
I'm going to tell you that for a variety of reasons, I had to stop in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, primarily because I, as you mentioned about the original goddess figure, was a big concept, this inflatable goddess. And just like I couldn't get support for that, my ideas from the time I was young were always tended towards the large.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in the Flowering, my upcoming book, I address the critique by some feminists about how the monumental is inherently male.
Oh, God.
Like, why do they get that and we don't?
Why can't you reclaim the monumental?
Right. Okay. So both I couldn't get support because my pieces were getting larger and I couldn't get financial support. And also the other thing was this is the only thing I ever was sexual. I was sexually harassed by the guy I was apprenticed to. And because you have to apprentice to a fireworks company. And it's the only time in my life I actually had to give up doing something. Okay. So in 74, I stopped. The last piece I did was a butterfly for Oakland, which was on the shore of Lake Merritt. It's that
which
piece.
is on the screen here. It's on the screen.
Yes. Yeah. And in 2011, as a result of Pacific Standard Time, the Getty Initiative, they also had a performance festival. And a lot of my peers from the 70s did what you said. They resurrected pieces and rebuilt pieces that they had done in the 70s, but I didn't do that. Actually, I picked up where I left off exactly from there. And I did a piece called The Butterfly for Pomona. Yep. And by the time I was working, I did that in 2012. Colored smokes, which is what I had mostly used in the 60s and 70s, weren't being produced anymore. So I had to do aerial fireworks, which I also did for A Butterfly for Brooklyn, which was a huge piece in relationship to the show at the Brooklyn Museum in
2014.
Yeah, but then they started making smokes again. And so I have, and we can talk about why there's so much interest in my smoke pieces all of a sudden, but I've had these opportunities to do new smoke pieces. And I've also found a pyrotechnician and a pyrotechnical company because it was no longer possible for my friends and me to just go do pieces. Like this is the Pasadena, now the Norton Simon Museum.
Yep, on the right.
Mean, me and a group of young male artists from LA, like Chuck Arnaldi, Laddie Dill, they all worked with me on this. I just bought the smokes and we just lit them. No permits, no nothing, no regulations, loved it. Anyway, now that's not possible. I have to work with a pyrotechnic company. But when I was asked to do when I did A Butterfly for Pomona, before I get to A Purple Poem for Miami, I had to find a pyrotechnic company. And as I often say, the luckiest day in my life was when Donald and I walked into the office of Chris Souza, who is a 6th generation person in a company called Pyro Spectaculars in California. And I told him the story of why I quit, why I had to quit. And when I did A Butterfly for Pomona with Chris, he brought an all-female crew.
Oh.
And his mother was the first female pyrotechnician in California.
That's amazing.
And she's been working on my pieces, including this one. So this is called Purple Poem for Miami. And what I'm doing now are entirely new site-specific pieces.
Can I play a couple seconds of it so people
Go
can?
ahead, sure.
All right, here we go.
He's only got one more topic. Yeah, okay, well, we'll just wrap up.
Now that's just a few seconds of something extraordinary. Are people there?
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, okay. So I love that you're saying it's a brand new piece. It was last year. Again, massive scale, monumental. You're using the monumental. I wanted you mentioned
Well, a butterfly for Brooklyn in Prospect Park was on an acre of land.
Oh.
And it was seen by 12,000 people. It was around my birthday, and all 12,000 people sang me happy birthday afterwards. It was just too much. I was crying, of course.
Oh. So that was your 80th?
Yes.
Or 75th?
No, 75th. That was my 75th. For my 80th, I did a piece in the street because it was the opening weekend of the art space here.
And you did that literally on your block in Belen?
Yes, on
Massive
my birthday, on my 80th birthday.
Now, did you have technicians with you, or did you do that one by yourself?
No, Chris and his mother came out.
Came and helped you.
They did that on their own.
Now, you've mentioned a few times that, well, first of all, before we move on that, I wanted to ask you about your atmospheres again, looking here at the Pasadena one that you did from 1970. I'd love for you to talk about how these relate to your painting practice at the time.
Okay, but I'm getting tired. So can this be the last question? It means we won't get to talk about toxic masculinity.
Oh, let's go to that.
No, let me just say one thing. I'll say this very simply. See, the way I laid out the color in, say, Pasadena Lifesavers relates to my development of color systems in the late 60s about how to create emotive states with color. And you could say that I simply took the systems that were imprisoned in this minimalist format and released it into the air, because I laid out the colors around the pool exactly like I laid out the colors in Pasadena Lifesavers.
Got it. Thank you. So we'll talk about one of your favorite topics. So
I don't know. I'm not sure it's my favorite topic, but it seems to be very prevalent today.
That's right. And so I bring this up because this got a lot of attention. This is an Instagram post that Judy did in 2019. And again, it kind of opens up our discussion of toxic masculinity. You're linking the Brett Kavanaugh hearings with, she did a series of works called Power Play in the early 80s. And this is the 3 Faces of Man from Power Play. So this got a lot of attention. I loved how Jonathan Katz wrote the article, and he called you the once and future prophet of heterosexual male privilege.
Oh, really? Who said that? I missed that.
Jonathan Katz, which I think is so perfect. And so, well, it's kind of obvious, but how present is Power Play?
Well, unfortunately, sadly, these paintings are from the 80s.
And the whole
3
body.
Faces of Man, the whole body of work. Actually, Maura, since you come from the academy, you're going to appreciate this story about, I called Jonathan Katz up cold. I didn't know him when my Santa Fe gallery wanted to show Power Play in 2012. And they wanted to do a catalog. And I knew Jonathan's, he's like one of the most prominent queer theorists. There was no such thing as queer theory when I did these, right? Or gender studies or anything. In fact, when I started Power Play, I went to the library to look up gender, and the only books were on women, as if only women have gender. Yeah. But anyway, so I thought Jonathan would be the perfect person to write about Power Play. So I called him up and he said, "Oh, Judy, I'm too busy. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, "Okay, so recommend somebody else." And there was this long silence. And he says, "Oh, this is Rosebud." And he said, "Okay, I'll do it." Okay. So he did what was a first really, brilliant essay. I thought was brilliant. Okay. 2018, Jeannie Greenberg Rohatyn showed Power Play at Salon 94 in New York. And we did a panel with me and Jonathan and Michael Kimmel, who started the first masculinity studies program in America, or maybe the world. Anyhow, Jonathan told me in 2012, by this time the Me Too movement had like burst on the scene. And Jonathan told me, when he wrote about Power Play, all his friends in academia rolled their eyes and they're like, "Judy Chicago, she's such an essentialist." And so Jonathan said at the panel, "It's amazing what 6 years will do." And we agreed. It was the academy collided with the real world.
Love it.
Because even if gender is a shifting construct, for most women, it's not. And certainly not for most men who are, so many men are so locked in to the construct of masculinity. Thus they'll rather destroy the planet than change.
Here we go. One of the images from Power Play. So Judy, we can end on this because on the left is one of the images from Power Play. It's of a man pissing on Earth. So kind of what Judy's referring to is kind of destroying the planet. And then Judy, you created this incredible new kind of, I guess it's an Instagram explosion, right? Create art for Earth. And so people should follow that on Instagram. It's extraordinary. It's kind of taken off globally.
I did it with Jane Fonda and Greenpeace, the wonderful street artists, Swoon, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Jane and her Fire Drill Fridays, and Hans Ulrich Obrist and the Serpentine. And we've gotten, there have been thousands and thousands of posts. I still get them. We all get them. What it was a call for artists to begin to use our talents on behalf of the climate crisis in ways that people can understand. In other words, instead of talking in tongues, which is what most art schools teach students to do, make art. It might be about something, but the forms make it impossible for even art smart people like me to understand what in the hell they're saying.
So true. And even me, Judy. Even me with the PhD, I struggle with it. So it's not
really.
No, that kind of theory speak, right? I know exactly.
Yes, and also the thing, it's both in written language and in images. And when all these museums bemoan our galleries' lack of audience, and they come up with all these things. Oh, let's do yoga in our galleries. I'm like, why don't you just show art that people care about and can understand?
So you don't need to do the yoga.
Right. So you don't need to do the yoga. Okay, Maura, you wore me out.
You
want to talk about my new book, which is good. Yes. Okay, fine. It'll be published on my 82nd birthday next July.
It's called The Flowering, Thames and Hudson, and a foreword by Gloria Steinem. And we've covered a lot of territory here. One of the things I wanted to talk to Judy about was the ways in which her work was received during the minimalist period. But that's a whole other conversation.
And it'll be in the book.
It'll be in the book. And so we'll open it up to some questions. I know, Judy, you're tired. If I can answer the question, I'll try. So I'll turn to Nick, and I want to leave this up as the image that people can look at, this extraordinary image, while we answer some questions. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Judy, for being so generous with your time today. I also want to mention I was happy to hear us talking about the divine feminine, because today is the new moon, and just is like a nice alignment right now. We do have a bunch of lovely questions, but I know that we're going to be conscious of time. So I would like to pass the mic over to Svetlana. Svetlana, I'm going to hand you the mic, and you should be able to ask your question now. Just a second.
Maura knows so much about my work that she can probably answer a lot of them because she's younger than me.
Yeah, but you know what? I would answer, Judy, and then you would interrupt me and go, no, that's not how it was.
No, probably not.
Okay. I'll try.
Hello, Judy. Hello, Maura. Hello, Nick and everyone. I was just wondering, my question was that there are conflicting views on whether fashion and feminism are mutually exclusive. And one would or could assume that feminism stands against the beauty ideal and women stereotyping. And having a feminist exhibition joined with a high fashion show, which uses capitalism, might appear as a great contradiction. And I wonder whether Judy received any negative feedback regarding this paradox.
Well, I'll jump in, Judy, and let you talk about negative feedback. But I think, I understand what you're saying, but I also think Judy so beautifully explained how she's using fashion to teach women's history, and showing the ways in which she can empower women through, let's say, her purses. But Judy, did you receive any negative feedback on that? I think is the question.
So it doesn't have to be just negative feedback, just feedback regarding that kind of contradiction.
She said no.
Also, as a child of a communist, I know that it's bizarre that I am doing some of the things I'm doing, but Donald and I went to the Soviet Union before it collapsed. And I'm like, I wonder what my father would have thought if he lived long enough, because it sounded good in theory, but didn't work in practice.
I like that. Nick, are there other questions?
There are, and Judy, do we have time maybe for one more question from you?
Yeah, okay. And so we'll see if Maura could do as well as she did on that one.
Okay. I'm going to hand the mic over to Lila. Lila, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You can now activate your mic.
Hello, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I'm currently working on my thesis at Sarah Lawrence College, and I'm writing a paper about Woman House. And I even built a replica of the exhibit that I'm going to be presenting later this week. So what an honor to ask you this question. But with the specific installation in mind, how do you think this exhibit would be different or changed in the context of 2020? And do you think there would be a major change in the contents explored through the various skits and the performance elements from Woman House? Thank you.
Judy, I'll jump in. Yes. I will say that, one of the most profound things Linda Nochlin told me once was that, that women during, the production of Woman House, that era, that the biggest compliment that they could be told was that they painted or made work like a man. And I think that is in some perspective that, the work that was being produced then was so incredibly radical. And it was, quote unquote, feminine in aesthetic. And I think that's one of the most remarkable aspects of what Judy brought to the table at that time, right? Was a female aesthetic. But I think the interesting part of that question is like, what has changed, right? I mean, women are no longer called like, oh, you paint like a man, but a lot has changed. And I wonder how like the cock and cunt performance would play out today, or Waiting by Faith Wildman, right? I mean, to me, they have so much relevance still today. That's kind of sad that they do, but I think they do. Do you agree?
Are you asking me, or are you asking? Yeah. The cock and cunt play was actually ripped off for Mrs. America and used in the 5th episode which resulted in ours going after them because they didn't credit it.
Oh, no.
But anyway, right. But anyway, in terms of the other questions, I don't actually have to come up with a theory or an answer, because over the years, there have been so many different versions of Woman House, Cyber House online, Gender House in Germany, in which men and women work together. Similarly, the At Home Project Donald and I did in Kentucky in 2001, which had both male and female students. And the most radical work in that was the men's work, because they tackled, just much as the women tackled subjects that hadn't ever been seen in art in 1970, the men tackled issues like pornography, child abuse from a male point of view, rape from a male point of view. And anyway, so there's been plenty of examples. In fact, there's a book by Vivian Fried Green about sexual abuse in art. And there's a whole chapter on Woman House seen through the At Home Project. So, I mean, and also my archive, my art education archive at Penn State has lots of records of projects inspired by Woman House. So its reverberations have gone on and on. I think there was a second part of that question, but I forgot what it was. Not just Woman House. Moreover, there was a second part.
No, I think you answered it.
Okay.
And I also think that, you know, the idea that you would kind of redo Woman House, I'm not sure, I'm sorry who asked that question's name, and reconsider it. It's still so critical that we have women-only exhibitions. People, you know, accuse them as being separatist or essentialist, but they're so critical still, so that we can expand knowledge to folks that are uninterested about women art. It's interesting that the Prado now has their first group exhibition of women artists opening 2 exhibitions of women in their 101-year history. So we still have a need for Women House and for all of these women-only exhibitions until there is equality.
Actually, I'll tell you, Maura, I think that it's essential until all the museums of the world devote half their space to women artists and open up to diverse perspectives and point of view. I think essentialist art by women, by people of color, by people of multiple gender identifications, be seen in their own context.
That's right. That's when we will reach equality in the art world, if that's possible. Anyway, I don't know if we want to stop there. Yeah, we're done. Okay, Judy's tired, and we've covered a lot of territory. So thank you, Judy, for all your time and sharing your insights.
Thank you, Maura. Thanks to everybody who listened in.
Yes,
and
we
send questions.
Of course. We've had people tuning in and so active in the chat from all over the world. So I want to thank everyone for joining, but thank you for being with us today, Judy. So it's been wonderful.
Guys. Nice. I hope the publication goes on. I think it's great what you're doing, how you've expanded it. Just think, all over the world.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful coming from you. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Judy. Thank you.
Bye, Judy.
Bye.
Maura, I don't know if you wanted to take any other questions or if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer anything.
I want to hear.
I think that I'm going to pass the mic over to Susan. I know we were kind of just mentioning that right now, but I'm curious if there's anything else we wanted to expand on based on Susan's question. So I'm going to pass that mic over to you.
I sort of put it, I typed it in the chat, sort of my idea, but the thing that, and I didn't have any questions till the word essentialist came up before it was also just addressed. Because my recollection of one of the things that destroyed the women's movement, what they call the second wave of it, was infighting amongst women, not the power plays of men, is that the women destroyed the movement by the way they attacked each other for their own differences in beliefs. And then some of you are aware of the whole debate about women of color, as they were called, and how the Academy sort of controlled the movement. But I'd like to know how at this point, when there does seem to be a chance to bring movement back to women's issues and not have it just be about men and the patriarchy, because that's getting to be a very worn out word as well. How can we start to work together to have that diverse world and to respect each other in our differences? That's really my question, because I'm tired of this whole show, I'll tell you. Not this show, this has been wonderful. But the show that we're living in is what I'm really tired of.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know that I have enough time to answer that question. And Judy's not answering questions at this point, but clearly there was infighting in the second wave women's movement, principally had to do with multiculturalism, and it imploded the movement in a way that was really, really sad and unfortunate, although we can't say it imploded it completely, because there are still people who are pushing forward from that generation. And I have faith in this generation of feminists who are extraordinary. And who have a far more open mind than I ever had at their age, and their attention to gender, transgenderism, the environment, to the importance of BIPOC peoples. I have tremendous faith in this generation of feminists, and I'm learning from them as we move forward.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Maura. I'm glad that you're in touch with them.
Good. Well, I'm a teacher, so there you go.
Well, I am too, but mine are mostly international people, and so they're not grounded in American history. They're from all over the world.
Right.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Maura, for that. I think we're at a good point now if we would like to shift to the poem, if that's okay with you, Maura.
Sure.
So we have a tradition here at The Rail that we end all of our conversations with a poetry reading. And today we are very happy to welcome our poet laureate, Aaron Shurin, to the stage. Aaron Shurin is the author of 14 books of poetry and prose, including The Blue Absolute from Nightboat Books and Flowers and Skies, 2 talks. He is Professor Emeritus in the MFA writing program at the University of San Francisco. Aaron, over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Judy and Maura, for a great conversation. I'll be brief. I'm just going to read a section of a long poem. The poem is in 5 parts, and this is part 3. And I think you'll be able to just follow it without knowing any of the details or incidentals from the others. The poem is called Shiver, and this section is called Breathe. My green eyes floating in the dark, and breathed as if the sky were sitting on my lungs. It has to be communal. It has to be beyond remembering or forgetting. The pages need to rustle and turn by themselves, as if the wind of the arriving news were blowing from start to finish, front to back. Invisible book. My mother reads, her green eyes peel back the letters. And then he just seemed to fall apart in his limbs, like a marionette with strings snipped, and would have fallen to the ground were he not already scraping the ground. His eyes with their retinas lifting away in shock, and the floaters zooming in like drones of the vitreous. Invisible vision. Now, yes, but behind the steel mounds, the hubs of digital clouds or digital air or electric packets delivering shivering sums of shivering suns, the city denuded, the hills leveled, and the valleys filled in. He sold his pillow for $5K. It has to be collective. It has to be grabbed by the throat and shaken. Or was that you shaking me out of slumber as I woke to clouds of plaster dust circling the room like a tiger, the bricks and timber shattered in the cold, the city shivering? Which was the real history? Was there more than one behind another behind another? Who arrived? Who left? Who stayed against all odds? Who danced on the tabletops in a flurry of pastel scarves and 3-day stubble, squealing spacious? And built a theater out of Kleenex boxes and nail polish for a musical version of Long Day's Journey into Night in Pig Latin, and brought the house down. Or sailed away on the barks of the epidemic from Laredo to ruin with a smile that wouldn't fade and a free pass to a convo with the angels. Or got priced out, evicted, and laid off all at once, but was saved by her business of handmade organic shrouds. No irony. One behind another, not in sequence, but stacked like plates and conflated. If I say, I remember, does that mean I made it up? If I say, made it up, was history my evil twin? If I say, history, I mean I dreamed something, sifted and resifted, stayed in the bottom of the pan. It has to be cooperative, like the wind and the sail, as if time, with its telescope or microscope, she couldn't tell, slowed in the distance and slowed in the foreground, and her hand slowed too as the list lengthened. I remember, I made it up, invisible images. Everyone breathe. Once in the early years, he married the city on a jagged outcrop on top of a hill, with his eyes clear and the air clear and that blue jewel horizon, and his pledge of intent with his heart clear in the deep breathing chest. I take you, he said, and that clarity, that northern light, which made everything visible all at once. With no clouds, no smog, no shiver, no shock, every cornice and balustrade, every cedar and pine, every dizzying hill and dune and tower and scalloped beach at the western edge, with the green eyes of my mother, the painter, growing into mine, and time wide open as though stopped or unending. I do, and the covenant like a poem, wide open and unending, invisible innocence, and the joy of the wind. Everyone breathe. The city behind the city. You were there, I remember, with your velvet tunic embroidered with leaves I coveted, and your straw hair in a ponytail, and a gentle smile on half your face, while the other half courted a lascivious leer. And both touched me in my hard place. The city shivers. I think we walked all day and talked nonstop for hours till midnight stopped our chatter and my bed swallowed us like a lotus closing. And did we wake? Did that bed ever disgorge us? History is a vision of a version. It has to be a collaboration. It has to be stopped and started in the joy of the wind. My mother shivers. She remembers the fierce clarity of light. It shows what it needed to show, so she paints what she needs to see. I saw you from a distance, scriptural, and from close up, devotional, and from inside, sacramental. I may have made you up out of necessity. That was my home, they sold. Everything shivers. He said, I do. The sky can tell the difference between what's in front and what's behind. My green eyes, still kissing in the blue, blue light, one behind another. Everyone breathe. I neglected to say that it's dedicated to San Francisco, of course.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was beautiful. I, once again, just really want to send our heartfelt thanks to Judy, to Maura, to Aaron for reading today. Thank you all for tuning in and for your questions, and apologies we couldn't get to all of them. I do also want to mention that this year marked the Rail's 20th anniversary, and we will be extending this celebration all the way into 2021. So if you are able to, please consider making a year-end contribution to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent, much like this program, our NSE, and our special projects like We the Immigrants. Every amount matters to us, and our goal is to double last year's participation and reach 500 donors. You can check out a link in the chat with some information about our donation page. And you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Robert Wilson, Willem Dafoe, and Charles Chafaye. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from Annabelle Lee. You can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and or goodbye and or happy new moon. So thank you.
Happy New Moon. I like that.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Judy.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Moon.
Thank you. Happy New Moon. This was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Truly good. Truly good.